good to start?
No, I'm good.
All right, fantastic. Welcome to another Sunday Superversive live stream. I am your host, Benjamin Wheeler, and today we are going to discuss the classical myth and how to do good adaptions of them and different theories and ideas. Uh, I'm going to start with a reading from the Aeneid, which is probably one of my favorite pieces of classical myth of all time. Anthony, how are you doing today? You doing good? You never had a bad day in your life? Good. Uh,
Yeah.
Arms and the man I sing, who, forced by fate and haughty Juno, unrelenting hate, expelled and exiled, left the Trojan shore. Long labors both by sea and land he bore, and in that doubtful war before he won the Latian realm and built the destined town, his banished gods restored to rights divine, and settled sure succession in his line, from whence the race of Alban fathers come, and the long glories of majestic Rome. That's the first stanza of the Aeneid. This is what translation is this? This is the Franklin Library Edition, which is very nice. Verse and translation of John Dryden. Hmm.
Well, because my favorite translation of the Iliad, and by extension the Odyssey, even though I didn't do as much checking because I had enjoyed his translation of the Iliad so much, but
Hmm.
my favorite translation of the Iliad was Stanley Lombardo. Uh, and we've had this discussion before, but I judge all translations of the Iliad based on how well they translate the first line of the Iliad, which is arguably the greatest first line in all of fiction. Uh,
Sing,
I
O
guess the
Muse, of the
Aeneid has a
rage of
good,
Achilles.
yeah, the Aeneid has a good claim on it too, though. Don't get me wrong, but it's up there. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
uh, you're right. The Aeneid would have a good claim, but and I love Lombardo's version of it. Sing, goddess, Achilles' rage, black and murderous, uh, which is fantastic.
It is.
Uh, his translation of the Odyssey, I always judge translations of the Odyssey by how well they translate, and it's just literally one word, which is completely unfair to do, by the way. But
I don't
it's
think
my
so.
judgment.
Right,
How
right.
well they describe Odysseus, because Homer uses a unique word to describe Odysseus famously,
Hmm.
right? Uh, Emily Wilson translated it. We've mentioned this as a complicated man. Uh, Awful, probably the worst.
I
Uh,
literally wipe it from my mind as much as possible.
yeah, that's such a bad translation of that line. Lombardo does okay. He calls him the cunning hero, which is pretty good because it gets across like he's still heroic, but there's like a side to him, right? But the
Hmm.
absolute king of this and is I think it's Fitzgerald. It's either Fagles or Fitzgerald. Translates it as the man of twists and turns, which is such a good line and such a good description. It's like is my go-to when I think of Odysseus. Right? He's
Oh
the
yeah.
man of twists and turns. Just a absolutely awesome translation. Uh, yeah, so we are going to be discussing translating classic works, which we say Greek, but we're going up to the Aeneid, so Greek and Roman.
Yeah, it's sort of like a classical canon. Like really,
Mhm.
I don't think there is a version of the Aeneid. No one ever really talks about it. It's just the Aeneid. To me, it's always been like the third pillar, sort of the Iliad, except for the Romans, sort of explaining the Roman myth to themselves and how they view themselves as they became an empire. Because famously, Augustus commissioned Virgil to write this. Um, you know, for propaganda purposes. But it stood up over the test of time, and people genuinely liked it. Um,
This happens more than you think, too.
oh yeah.
I had a teacher in college who I actually liked. She taught my myth and culture class. She was very irritated, like mock irritated, I should say, by me because I already knew a lot of what she was talking about, and she said I used to skew her data uh, because she would like poll the class, like, "Have you heard of this?" And I'd be the only one who raised my hand.
Right.
Uh, but anyway, she hated Chaucer for that reason, because she said like, "Oh, Chaucer was hired to do it," but I don't know. I never bought her argument because that's not really an argument. Like, it's true. She's
Yeah.
absolutely correct,
I mean, I'd like to
but it
be
doesn't.
hired to write something for somebody's glory. You know how long I could live off that, Anthony?
Mhm.
That's like $10,000, $20,000. It's great.
Yeah, yeah. The point is, like, she is absolutely right. She's correct that Chaucer was hired, like, to be the poet of the era for that, right? But
Hmm.
that doesn't necessarily speak to Chaucer's quality, good or bad. It just is a fact, because you
Right.
could say the same of the Aeneid and Virgil, who, and if Virgil is good enough for Dante, then he's absolutely good enough for me, right? Like,
Oh yeah.
uh, Dante would know, and he does not judge Virgil harshly due to him being hired. Longfellow is the American equivalent of this.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he created the American, like, kind of the founding mythology of America was more or less created by Longfellow, who is kind of underrated in I don't want to say underrated in terms of quality, but underrated in terms of like the effect that he had on the American, view of itself,
Yeah.
right? Like, he was actually really influential. The Ride of Paul Revere was entirely Longfellow. Longfellow is an example of one where I would say he's not really that great. Like, he's fine. I don't
We
hate him or
remember
anything.
him though, you know.
Yeah, I do remember some of his lines. They come up. Listen, my child, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere is a very memorable verse. But yeah, point is that just being hired doesn't really speak of your quality one way or another. It just means that you were hired. If anything, the odds are you're probably pretty good, or else they wouldn't have hired you.
Oh yeah. There's a, what we're talking about mostly is more like adaptions that have been like, how do I want to put it? Like a lot of places, what you would have in the patronage network is someone would want um, a history of X, or research about Y, and I want my genealogy connected to the Trojans. How can I do that? Well, Brutus took over England, along escaping with Aeneas back in year negative 1000 or whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you'd get some like these pretty good pieces of art. And sometimes it would just be like, I just want something like this, and I want you to write it for my own amusement. That's part of the reason why libraries throwing out old books is such a terrible thing. Some of those things are literally unique, as in some dude hired somebody famous to write it, and there aren't any other copies in 1,000-mile radius, if or even in the world. But
Mm-hmm.
locking down our subject, you could say that the Aeneid is an adaptation of Homer's work. It takes a relatively minor character. He's named and he has a scene, I believe, from the Iliad, Aeneas, and then expands it out. Famously, and the scene that stuck with me most is him carrying, his father and his household gods out of the sack of Troy. It's his epithet is usually pious Aeneas, and that's been
Yeah,
something that's spoken deeply to me. Go for it.
there is one moment in the Iliad that did stick out to me. Aeneas is only mentioned like me once, maybe twice, right?
Right.
Uh, Something like that, like very, very little. Uh, However, in one of the moments that Aeneas is mentioned, in my translation of the Iliad at least, and I was wondering if this was something added by the translator or not, but it says that like Aeneas was spared because he was to found a great city or a great empire or something like that. Uh,
Yeah.
which I'm like, oh wow, I did not realize that was in there. So it wasn't just like he didn't randomly pick Aeneas; it's actually mentioned in the Iliad.
Right. And these sort of things are important because you can use them to found ideas and nations and more, and create sort of not I don't want to even say a mythology because we do know that the Trojan War happened and there were many Trojan Wars. I was listening to rather Plutarch's Lives, and he mentions three explicit Trojan Wars. It was a happening place. The famous one, and then one by Calicothus, and then another one I forget who by. I don't even know who Calicothos is, by the
Yeah,
way,
I
Anthony.
once had a discussion with people where I was talking about like think about this for a moment, where they go like, so why did the Trojan War start explicitly according to the Iliad, forgetting the god aspect of it, right?
Right.
Like the higher level aspect. The lower level aspect is that a princess of Sparta was kidnapped by a Trojan prince, right?
Yep.
Okay, so we have this aspect of it, right? Uh, and then I thought for a moment, I'm like, we kind of dismissed this as, well, this was something that was thought up by a storyteller, right? Like,
Right.
clearly. And then I go, like, but why? Right? Like, and then you go, think of it another, like, that's actually a perfectly plausible reason for a war to start. Like,
Oh
think
yeah.
of it another way. If someone were to ask you, why did World War One start? You would go, well, Serbian terrorists, or, is it
Gavrilo
Serbian? Yeah,
Princip. Yep.
yeah, Serbian terrorists assassinated an Austrian archduke, right? Like,
Yep.
I mean, why is that any less plausible or any more plausible than a princess of Sparta was kidnapped,
Yep.
right? Like, it makes perfect sense. I did read recently a really interesting interpretation of the Iliad, where somebody pointed out it's like we in the modern day lionize Hector so much. They said, but if you look at it from the Greek perspective and the people who were originally listening to the poem, they said, think of it sort of like this. They go, Hector's role in the story and the Trojan role in the story is that Helen of Sparta was kidnapped, right?
Mm.
Now, Helen is portrayed as a somewhat, trying to think of how to put it, let's say, crafty individual is
Yes.
might be the word. She is very good using her beauty and influence to manipulate the men around her, right? And she seems very comfortable with it. This aspect of her personality even survives in other works, like in the Trojan Women and in the Odyssey. She's still alive. She has essentially manipulated them into forgiving her, right? Like, which is wild. By the way, but anyway, she was kidnapped though. Like, she didn't run
It's
off with them,
pretty
as far as I'm.
privilege, Anthony.
Yeah,
Pretty
no,
privilege.
actually though, like, but she was kidnapped. She didn't
Right.
run off with them, as far as I know. So, anyway, they said if you think of it in those terms, when they consider giving Helen back, which is obviously like to anybody with half a brain, especially to any Greek, you're like, yeah, do that. Why would you not do that? Right? Like,
Right.
of course. But Hector is one of the people who opposes this as like a matter of honor or something, right? Like, no, we can't do that. Uh, he also rejects it because he's like, well, it's too late now. But he's clearly just justifying himself.
Yeah.
Uh, and somebody mentions like, if you are a Greek reading this story, I think that Hector would not come off so much as like a hero like we read him as today, but as a really well written villain, right? Like a very understandable and villain with very strong motives, and who is very sympathetic, but who is nevertheless the bad guy,
Right.
right? Like, and I think there is something to that interpretation as well, right? Because
Yeah.
somebody mentioned, like, after all, like, in the final analysis, the Trojans started it, right?
Yeah. I'm
Like,
well. I mean, I don't know. How would you? How would you? Yeah, I guess I would put it to it. Paris could have chosen Hera or Athena.
yeah, he could have chosen Hera or Athena. Uh, and again, like, they did have the option and did consider the option of giving Helen back. One of the interesting things about the Iliad, and this is less so in the Odyssey, but one of the interesting things in the Iliad is that it's actually like if you took out the gods from the story, a lot of what they did could still be explained and make sense,
Yes.
right? Like, and I think this is on purpose. Like, even if the gods weren't there, and we're told explicitly the gods did this, the gods did that, right? Like,
Right.
even if they were not there, though, the story would still make sense. That's why there's a famous theory about the Iliad, which is probably nonsense, right? But it's a famous theory where they said that, oh, in the ancient Greeks, they didn't actually have a concept of like the self, because anytime that somebody introspects in the story, it's not actual introspection, it's the god speaking to them. Like, maybe they thought that the voice that we view in our heads as the subconscious was the god speaking to them, right?
Right.
Now, I find this idea incredibly entertaining and kind of fascinating, but it also strikes me as I feel like we're assuming that our ancestors were way too stupid. Uh, so it's probably not true. However, there is something to that in the interpretation of the Iliad, of like, for example, Achilles goes famously, right, in the first confrontation with Agamemnon.
Yeah.
Achilles is literally about to kill Agamemnon, like, on the spot. And then Athena grabs his hair and tells him no, right? And he holds his sword. Uh, well, you could say that, like, well, he stopped because of Athena. It could have also been a moment where he realized suddenly, right, what a bad idea it would be, because it would have been a horrible idea, right, to
Right.
kill Agamemnon, and then he just leaves, right? And there's a variety of moments like this throughout the Iliad, so it's
Yeah.
really interesting. Uh,
I suppose like it's one of those things like one of my first introductions to classical myth was Armand de Sante's Odyssey. Do you remember that? Did you ever watch that
oh,
one?
the movie. I
Yeah,
didn't
the
see it,
movie.
but you've shown it to me before.
The it's pretty great. It's got some really good parts to it. It was interesting because there's a little bit more nudity, and I was like 5 when I saw it. The maid gets killed with one spear going through her swain and then through her, which I always thought was cool because she's a traitoress, and then I'd say a rude word and my mom would wash my mouth out with soap. Um, we had it on VHS, like recorded from like channel 11. It was pretty great. I liked it partially because it kept all the magic in it, and then it also had a sort of sense of adventure to it that, quite frankly, most of the stuff that we see nowadays just doesn't have. But it doesn't compare to like the pulp stuff and the stuff that Kursova's liked in the past and talked to us about. But I think it's a very successful adaptation. The reasoning is, of course, is because I think they understood a lot of how the suitors work and how the maids and stuff do it, and the characters are all beautiful and heroic, and they flirt with each other, when appropriate. Um, Calypso's interesting. Circe's interesting. Uh, like it had a lot to it. And of course, it's Amon Desante in his prime. That's fantastic. 10 out of 10. Um, the Iliad movie had Eric Bana as Hector, and Leonardo DiCaprio as Achilles. And of course, there's a famous line where this kid's helping get Achilles' armor on, and he goes, "Aren't you scared? I wouldn't go out and fight that giant." And then Achilles, Leonardo DiCaprio goes down. Perfect scene, and that's why no one will remember your name. Um, which is great. I think.
Oh, that's a fantastic line.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. And then he kills this giant. Uh, so it's like it's not probably not as good as it could be, but it's better than it should have been. Um, Eric Bana was a weird one.
Yeah, this is the movie Troy, right?
Yeah, Troy. Sorry, I called it Iliad for some reason.
Oh,
Uh,
because it's an
it
adaptation.
is the Iliad. Yeah.
Uh,
I think I think part of the reason why Hector doesn't strike people in this as he tends to do in the poem is because Eric Bana is retiring in personality. They played up Hector's nobility, but at the same time they lost something of his vital passion for Troy. Um, you know, I'm not going to claim to be a big scholar of the Iliad, as much as I should be. But every time I've read lines from Hector or others, I see this deep line for the glory of Troy and sort of his own glory because, he's making Troy glorious and he's slaying these people. He is fighting the fight for Troy. I think a portion of that is why he spoke especially to the Anglo spirit, where um, he was lionized by them for his nobility, even though it's very clear that Hector would be just as happy pirating in the Mediterranean, and quite frankly, it's like how World War One has causes other than the Archduke getting shot because he went to St. Louis at night or something. He we have a lot of Serbians in St. Louis, so the joke's a lot funnier than people think. Um, the I bet there was pirating. Like Troy was taxing the area. Troy was probably pirating things. You don't make a multipolar war machine like what Troy had, to fight the Greeks with. It had allies from all over the world coming in to, join the mosh pit. Um, I think there's a bit more to Hector than the poem allows for, but it's not as important as his defense of his home. Even though piracy has tumos to it, especially when done properly and led by a great man like a Pompey or something. Uh, quite frankly, most of the time it's just a bunch of uneducated Somalians or Corsicans, which may or may not be worse, or anything else like that, just roaming around with AK-47s trying to get to places. Uh, you know, they ransomed Caesar and they laughed at him every time he's like, "I am going to crucify you all, I swear on Zeus." Caesar. Oh, and then he came back and he crucified them all.
Oh yeah, famous story.
Famous story. So I think Hector has lost a little something in every adaptation I've seen of him, just because he is just kicking in everyone's teeth up until he meets Achilles. He's fighting the good fight. He's defending his homeland. There's a heroic character to it that I think is deeply lost by most adaptions when they give him somebody who looks, like Eric Bana, handsome,
Hmm.
appropriate, good,
Yeah,
leadership
and
looking.
to be clear, and this is true of I think anybody who reads the Iliad. I've never talked to someone. We've had conversations about this, but Hector is my and basically everyone's favorite character, right? Like, uh, it's impossible, I think, for anybody to read the Iliad and enjoy the Iliad and not like Hector, right?
Yeah.
Because there's something about the way that Hector is written in the story that is incredibly human to me. Uh,
Hmm.
I don't know, like, I'm trying to figure out how to like. First off, what one of the interesting things about the Iliad is there is this one line that Homer gives where, even though these are like almost godlike men with like super strength, right? They lift like
Hmm.
massive stones and things. Hector says that they're nothing like the men of old, right? Who were
Right.
almost gods, right?
Hercules and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Uh, so even as early as the Iliad, you have people looking back on like the golden age, right, and lamenting the decline.
We're not
But
gonna make
Hector,
it. We're
yeah,
so back. It's so over.
it goes all the way back to the Iliad.
Yes.
Uh,
We're not in
but
a
there's
golden
something
age.
about Hector, and I've mentioned this before. One of my favorite things about Hector that I really really loved is he's such a flawed person, but so understandable and like in his flaws. Like the very famous scene, right, where he meets his wife and Helen and his son, right, and he takes off his helmet,
Mm.
which is the most famous Hector scene probably besides the fight with Achilles. Uh,
Yes.
One of the things I love about the scene is that as his wife begs him not to fight, he tells her, "Well, I have to because I'm the Prince of Troy, right? Like,
Hmm.
I don't have an option." And then he picks up his son, and he tells his wife, like, and we're almost certainly going to lose, right? Like,
Right.
there's no, there's really no chance. I'm probably going to lose, and to be honest, I will probably die, and you will probably be a slave, right?
Mm.
And his wife is in tears, but he goes like, "Look, you have to accept this." But then he picks up his son, and he says, "My son's gonna be a greater prince than I ever will." I love this scene because it's so human. Of like Hector, intellectually can grasp that he's probably going to die, but he can't internalize it, right?
Right.
Like when looking at his infant son, even though intellectually, like what he's saying, like is a direct contradiction, right? Like
Hmm.
obviously, if Troy is going to fall, there's no way that at the absolute best, his son, of course, is famously killed, uh, but absolute best case scenario, his son grows up a slave, right? Like there's this idea of his son being a greater prince than him is crazy, but he can't bring himself to say that, right? To really believe that. He can't internalize his death, which makes a lot of his actions later make so much sense to me, right? Because Hector is shown as being extremely brave, extremely noble, right? Like he takes on Ajax, who's a mountain of a man. You know, he takes on these various Greeks. He takes on and kills Patroclus, although it's really his chariot driver helps him out with that. But still, he kills Patroclus, right?
Yeah. I
And
mean, it's the chariot driver is a slave. He doesn't count. Maybe at best he's a noble scion of a house. Don't
yeah,
treat these
yes and
people like
no.
people, okay?
It's a big
Anthony.
enough deal that Patroclus kind of goes like, "Yeah, you wouldn't have gotten me if your chariot driver hadn't helped."
Anthony,
And
slaves
Hector's like,
aren't people. We know this. We've been over this.
"Yes." Uh, that reminds me of my absolute favorite joke in Archer, where they're in like Cheryl, who is super rich. If you remember, I don't know how much you remember of Archer, but
I
uh,
loved Archer. It was great.
yeah. But so Cheryl is super rich, and they learn it for the first time. This is like one of the later seasons where they learn this, by the way. So they've gone like 6 seasons or something, having no idea that she's like incredibly rich, right? Uh, so they're in her house, and they go, "Wait a minute, you're rich?" And he goes, "Yeah, and my grandfather." Well, he goes, "My grandfather was actually a slave owner." And then she goes, "So hold on, you're rich?" And she goes, "Turns out slavery was pretty great." And he thought slavery was pretty great. And then Mallory says, "What? Prove it. Like prove that you're really rich." And Archer says, "What's there to prove? It's free labor." Whi- Which is probably my favorite joke in Archer. We quote that all the time. He goes like, "What? Prove it. What's there to prove? It's free labor." Uh, Incredible joke. 10 of 10. Anyway,
Yes.
back to what I was saying though. Yeah,
Right.
like so when Hector faces Achilles later, this is why I was always like this idea that Hector hadn't internalized his own, the defeat of Troy and his death makes his actions against Achilles make sense to me, right? Uh,
Right.
because he sees Achilles, and that's what Achilles is representing to him at this point in the story, right? Like earlier in the story, he still has this belief that he can, even if he intellectually knows it's impossible, he's acting like he can win,
Yes.
right? He is treating, when other people advise caution, Hector's even pushing back against it, right? Like
Right.
other people, there's a famous scene where like someone in the Trojan camp says, "All right, I know we've pushed them back to the ships today, but we really should get behind the walls because as soon as Achilles comes out, things are going to change, right?" And Hector basically says like, "Shut up, you pansy ass coward. If you say that again, I'll kill you." And then like Homer literally says like, "And his good advice was ignored." Uh,
Huh?
like he was right,
Yes.
Uh, so they have this scene, and then when Achilles comes after him, I think that that's the moment where it's like the intellectual acceptance of death and the actual confrontation with the moment of death, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it goes from an intellectual proposition to a certainty staring him in the face when he
Right.
sees Achilles and says, I can't win. And that's when he needs to steel his nerves and realize that he needs to stop and fight a losing battle, right? So he needs that time of literally running around the city to come to grips with the fact that he's not going to win this one,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Which
And
I
even then, he still has a moment where he thinks for a second that he might win until he realizes that Athena tricked him. And that's the moment where he's like, and that's when Hector knew like that he would die.
yeah.
Yeah. But
It
yeah,
yeah, and it's like how do you adapt that? Like
it's
like
very hard.
it's very hard because one, you have to have a scene where it's essentially this focus on a character who's running around trying to accept his death. If it was a musical, this would be like the song. Not even have Achilles say anything or sing anything, but just have him, silently chasing Hector while he sings. Obviously, I don't. These people are pretty good jumping around the stage. I don't think that they can like run around Troy and sing at the same time. But you get me.
You'd have
But
to use some theater magic for this one. I don't know what you would do.
rotate walls on a
Yeah, that
spinner.
would work.
But
Yeah.
you're welcome. Feel free to use it without crediting me. I don't need any thanks. Uh, but like in a movie, let's say that you've played it up right? Like these are two masculine men. You've got like Gerard Butler as Agamemnon, uh, you know, all these other things. Like, how do you have, uh, um, Hector sort of come to grips with this, but also, run around the city, also do all these actions? Like you would have to have the conversation beforehand, like with his wife and Astyanax, and then Astyanax, uh,
Yeah, CNX.
Astyanax, and then of course have it play out. But it's like it's not as satisfying as it might be. You might have some clever camera work or whatnot, but to actually have the internal monologue, either you have to have some sort of like chorus going on, or Homer literally sitting there and quoting the lines, or that wouldn't be good, but like something like that. There's got to be something to make it both worth watching and worth listening to, and bring someone to the satisfaction of a man who knows he's going to die and is struggling to accept it. It's similar with things like Odysseus and whatnot. How do you make Odysseus smart? The Greeks probably had an IQ on average 10 to 20 above what we have right now. Uh, and I'm including like the Anglo population by itself. And it's so you could do a lot more with that, and they could tolerate a lot more with that because they had attention spans back then. Apparently, I've heard of this mythical thing called an attention span, Anthony. But
It's a myth.
right. But it's like, how do you turn that into something that is more than just um, just a dude running around and then turning. Like it's hard. I don't know how you would do it in a theater kind of sorry, a movie kind of way.
Yeah, you would need to have. So, if I were to adapt it into a movie, I'm thinking this over. I would absolutely keep the scene where he meets what's his wife? Is his wife Amphitrite? No, that's
Uh,
Poseidon's wife. That
ooh,
I
it's
don't think
similar
that
to that
Andromache.
Andromachy, yeah.
Yeah, or Andromache. I don't know how it's pronounced. One of those two. Uh,
Andromache.
yeah, Andromache. So I would absolutely keep the scene where he meets Andromache and he meets Helen and he meets Astyanax, right? That because that's a very important scene for understanding Hector as a character, right?
Right.
So I would definitely keep that scene, and I would have him. I would take out like the full run around the city 3 times. here's the thing about that moment too. Like, I think it works better on the page than it does visually, because anytime I actually like try and map it out in my head, it seems a little goofy, right? Like on the page, it's fine because they could just say, right, like, and it's supposed to be that they're really powerful heroes. So they have the stamina to do this, right? Like, and also it's another thing too, that one of Achilles' titles, like, that Homer uses a lot, is that he's like the great sprinter. Like, this is kind of a big deal as well. Uh, that Achilles is really fast. For some reason, this was like this was something that Homer thought worth being like a title of Achilles. Uh, that Achilles just
Never
could
skipped
run.
cardio.
Yeah, Achilles never skipped leg day. Uh, no, but like, probably what I would do is, instead of having like the run around the city 3 times, I would have a moment where he's like, all right, after he kills Patroclus, you have that scene. You make it clear that he's in some form of that there's like some bloodlust going on, right? Which is what happened. I saw a one-man show version of the Iliad, and this is what they emphasized, right? Which I think is a good idea, right? Like, because that's kind of the point,
Right.
that Hector is, again, he is taken by the glory of the war, right? As much as he claims it's for higher ideals, you know, it's not entirely. Even though I don't think he's lying, I think it's more complicated than that, right? Like,
Right.
he wasn't lying, but ultimately, in the heat of the battle and the bloodlust of the war, he's taken by the glory of it as well, right?
Oh yeah. And
So,
it's one of those things where like I fully accept that this is also part of the charm of the Iliad, the glory of war. Like these are
mhm,
glorious people worthy of emulation. You know, it's Aeneas doesn't quite have the same focus because obviously it's from a Roman perspective. The Ro
yeah, it's
I
really interesting. Like, the Romans hated Odysseus.
Yeah.
Uh, and I could totally understand why they would, right? Like,
Yes.
that, I completely grasp it. Odysseus was the man of twists and turns. He was indirect. He used disguises. He fought with a bow, right? He
Yes.
uses tricks and guile, and that's everything that the Romans hate. They want you to be direct. They want you to challenge head on. They want, right? Like, they
Mm-hmm.
want you to say what you mean and mean what you say. So everything that Odysseus represents, the Romans would hate. And even in the Aeneid, I'm pretty sure like that they kind of trash talk Odysseus once or twice. Uh,
I don't really recall any special lines, but I'm sure it's
I
in
could
there.
be wrong. I read this somewhere, but whatever. But going back to it,
Hold
so
on.
how would I adapt it?
So when you said the Romans like people to say what they said, uh, there's two lines. I was listening to Plutarch's Lives to get inspired by the works of great men in the past, and somebody mentioned that they are warriors who happen to be priests rather than priests who are warriors. But also, there's another. Oh no, that was from a video about Marcian. Marcian. Anyway, but the second bit is so Gaius Gracchus. This is from the Bronze Age Pervert Caribbean Rhythms recent episode. He reads it from Plutarch. Gaius Gracchus was haranguing a dude who was known to be effeminate. And he goes, "Oh, you say these things about my mother. Well, you've had more sex with men than she has."
Amazing. 10 of 10.
Anyway, I wanted to share that before.
No, you were right. That
Anyway, you still there, Anthony? Did you get cut off? Anyway, while he's coming back on, uh, I do want a good Aeneas thing, but it's a little bit difficult because it's a little bit more drawn out and it's not as sharp as the Odyssey or the Iliad. There's some things in there like when they do the races with the boats and whatnot, which are all proper and appropriate. Some things just have to be cut down and out of it. I think something about you could do something like in two parts from Troy to Dido to Rome, and then you have Aeneas founding the city at Rome. Um, or sorry, founding. No, he founded Alba Longa, and then Romulus founded Rome. But you could have that sort of thing in two parts, but because it's really does feel like two different stories. The story where he reaches the ground of Italy, and then the post ground of Italy. Um, excuse me, let me just double check if Anthony's.
Oh no.
Oh,
Oh no.
you're back.
I died.
You
I don't
died.
even know why I would have died.
You have been silent for about 2 or 3 minutes.
Sad.
Mm.
My insights were mind bending, groundbreaking, even.
uh, we're not going to make it now that we've lost these insights. It's so over, Anthony.
It's so over. No. What I was gonna say, what I was trying to say is, I would not I would have Hector like step out to fight Achilles, have them all go like, Achilles is coming, he's coming for you, right? And Hector be like, stand aside, I'm not afraid of him, right?
Mm.
See him, and then I would probably have him like flee behind the walls of Troy again, and almost maybe even have it like, I don't want to say a panic attack because that sounds a little too modern, and it's also
Yeah.
been kind of zeitgeisty. After The Last Wish, everybody was talking about like, oh, it's an accurate portrayal of a panic attack, right? Uh, which is fine. Like, I actually think The Last Wish is a really good movie, but
What's The Last
like
Wish?
I don't want to be too zeitgeisty about it. Like, but have that moment of him seeing Achilles, getting ready to fight him, and then like realizing that he is
Oh,
going
yeah.
to die if he fights him, and fleeing behind the walls, and even have Achilles outside of the city, or Achilles outside of the city, and go, Hector, I know you're there, come out. He goes, or I'll break down these walls stone by stone, or something like that, right?
Yes.
Like, and have a moment of Hector, like, coming to terms with it, and then, take a deep breath, and have him walk outside and go, Achilles, I'm right here,
Yes.
challenge me if you must, right?
Ooh,
Uh,
you could have something like Athena pretending to be his wife, encouraging him to fight.
You could do that. I think that would get across the idea that's being presented in the run around the city scene. That's a little less visually silly,
Sure.
frankly. Like I said, I think it does work on the page. It wasn't something that bothered me on the page, but when I think it over and like of how it would be viewed visually, it seems kind of odd, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but I think this idea of like Hector sees Achilles, hides behind the walls, Achilles challenges him. He has this moment of like blind panic, takes a moment, steels himself as Achilles is threatening to break down the walls of Troy himself, right? And then he steps back out to challenge him, and that's where you have the confrontation. It's the same basic, so that's how I would do it. So I think it could be done if you're creative, which Hollywood is not. Uh, right? But it gets
Yes.
across that idea. As we're talking about, this episode was about Greek adaptations and what makes a good versus a bad one. And we've been pretty hyper focused on the Iliad and the Odyssey, which, don't get me wrong, is fun and I enjoy it.
It's the
And the
easiest one to
Iliad.
work with.
Yeah. Uh, I mean, in the young adult, so there, unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, right? Like, there is a cottage industry of feminist retellings of Greek mythology. I hate it with a passion. Uh, it's awful, right?
Yes.
Like the most famous one is the Song of Achilles, where they just straight up make Achilles gay, uh, and that's literally the story. That's the conceit of the story, right? Achilles is gay. Everyone, buy my book. Uh, Now I have no comment to make on if the book is actually well written or not. Maybe it is. But I will say that as an interpretation of what the Greeks valued about their heroes, it is bad. Uh,
Mm.
because they would not have valued at all the idea that Achilles was gay. Uh,
Right.
I will say this, there are very weird stories in the mythology about Achilles, like Odysseus having to find him while he was in disguise as a woman to avoid going to war. Like, it's really strange. I don't know if you know what I'm referring to, Ben.
So who was dressed up like a woman? Achilles?
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
there's
yeah.
like
So his mother
and Odysseus has to find him.
Yes. So I think I remember this story. His mother, who had the gift of prophecy and I believe was a Titan, um, uh, base
He was a
married.
nymph, I thought.
Uh, well, okay, I'll accept that. Titaness, I should say. She dresses Achilles up and convinces him basically to dress up like a girl, so that he wouldn't be called to war. Uh, However, Odysseus, knowing that they just need Achilles and he's so great and all this jazz, throws out some weapons for the women to try, the girls to try. And Achilles basically just strings a bow like it's nothing. And he's like, ah, gotcha. He's like, ah, and then that's when, I think that's when Metis goes, or Thetis rather goes, if you go, you'll die, but be remembered forever. But if you stay, you'll live a long and life, long and good life. And so yeah, that's that story. Cross dressing to avoid
Yeah,
war.
it's a very weird story. To be honest, it just kind of confirms to me, like, and this is going to sound like me trolling or joking, but I'm actually being serious,
Hmm.
that Achilles is a gamma, uh, and always was a gamma. Uh, it kind of explains where that side of him came from.
Yeah, I mean it's like there's stories about that stuff where like the father dies and the mother raises the kid. Usually it goes a couple of different ways. Like either they become good and noble and stuff like that, or they become weird and evil, or they become driven by the things that they fight for. Like Sertorius, for Marius's quite frankly completely lost cause, or at least lost cause in the moment, because he technically won through Julius Caesar, sort of. Or you have the Gracchi brothers and stuff like that, who had weird behaviors, but quite frankly, I I understand the logic of the Gamma accusation, but I just don't get it. Like I can't put my heart into saying it. Like these people are more masculine than you or I will ever be. I could get on the juice,
So
become
I
entirely
think
ripped, and these people
I
would
will
still
argue
tell
that
me in
Achilles
half.
is a gamma. I'll make that argument. Him and Agamemnon, it was an argument between two gammas. And here's why. Like, are they more masculine in the sense of more martial, more able to fight, more of a warrior? Yes. However, I don't think this is due to inherent qualities of those people. I think it's due to the culture that they were raised in and the fact that their physical qualities were up to that par. Like Achilles was, godlike Achilles, right?
Yes.
Uh, Odysseus is, by the way, like under the radar. People kind of miss this, but Odysseus is also like has near superhuman strength, hence the bow that only he can
Oh yeah.
string, right? Like,
Yeah.
so, and he's also called godlike. So these are people of godlike strength and ability, right?
Hmm.
However, the sociosexual hierarchy, as it's described, isn't necessarily about what you are and are not good at, or even if you are and are not physically strong. Like this was
Hmm.
ancient Greece. It's not the modern day. You know, this is a
Right.
different culture, different time period, different everything. Like if you're going into battle, you're going to be in shape. There isn't really an option for not being in shape. You kind of have to be due to the world that they're in. You know,
Yeah.
this is why like for the vast majority of human history, and this is something that feminists are sort of kind of but not really right about because they get it in the wrong direction, but like for a lot of human history being fat was seen as being more attractive, right? And this makes perfect sense because it meant you were rich, right?
Right.
Like it followed perfectly. So the fact that Agamemnon and Achilles were martial, warlike, and even brave doesn't necessarily speak to them not being Gamma, because that's not what Gamma is.
Mm.
It's not what the socio-sexual hierarchy is. Rather, it is about your behavioral patterns, right?
Right.
I would argue that Achilles' behavioral patterns are extremely Gamma, even though I do not think, and will argue against the interpretation that Achilles is gay for Patroclus. The fact is that the extremes of his emotion to Patroclus, they are called out in the Iliad, right? Like,
Right.
he's being too extreme. And that's something of a Gamma trait, like this idea of the inability to regulate emotion properly, right?
Sure.
So you have that aspect of it. And then it goes to the argument with Agamemnon, right? The extreme pettiness that Achilles shows, right? They have the famous scene where they send delegates to him and they go, "We'll give you 3 times what you asked for." And Agamemnon has sworn on the river Styx that he didn't touch Briseis, right? Like,
Right.
you get everything and more. And Achilles just goes, "No." And they literally have a man there who is with them burst into tears and say, "You've killed us all." Like, we're all going to die. And
sorry, I
correctly,
shouldn't.
by the way.
Yes.
And this does not move Achilles. That's a level of extreme pettiness and, again, inability to regulate himself that's characteristic of the Gamma. Agamemnon as well. I understand that Agamemnon is a king and there's, like, insults you don't brook to the king and things like that. But the fact is, he is handling things in a very Gamma way. Also, isn't Agamemnon cucked?
Menelaus
so
is
that
cucked.
too. Yeah, so there's that too. Like, Agamemnon is shown to be a great warrior, right? Like, there's no doubt about that. He is a great fighter. He is not Achilles' equal, but he's in the top tier,
Yeah.
right?
Top 10 or so.
What was that?
Top 10 or so.
Yeah. Like, 100%. Like, he's shown as being admirable for his martial skills.
Right.
But once again, we have if he were an alpha, the sort of challenge to his authority would not, I think, have hit him as hard, because he would have had absolute confidence in his ability as king, right? That people would still follow him.
Well,
he lacks that alpha level of confidence.
See, here's the thing, though. Like, so first off, I firmly believe that while there is a bunch of thematic connections between, like, the football team and the warrior band of the Iliad kind of thing, I don't believe that there's the same sort of ability to be completely outside of the consequences of your actions. Well, we were looking at what was it, that musical prude nerds must die or something,
yeah, Prudy
from
Nerds
Star
Must
Kids.
Die.
Where spoiler alert for the first 5 minutes of the thing, don't listen now. You have this alpha who comes back as a ghost and he's murdering people, but he still has introspection enough to know that, if he fails, his dad's going to call him a cuck again. If he does this, he has to accept this abuse and stuff like that.
Oh shit, that's actually what it's about? I didn't know a thing about it.
No. It's about him murdering nerds, which is fantastic.
That's awesome,
I can't wait.
And I actually probably will watch it.
Oh yeah, no, I saw a single animatic and I was like sold. The problem is it's kind of horny and I don't like it, but it's
Oh well, yeah, that's Star Kid for you.
Anyway, but so he has self introspection. He has this stuff, but he's still like the high school quarterback. I've seen alphas of that kind. They're still, I don't want to say questioning or whatever, but they act, they've all acted more like, sort of a business like Agamemnon or something like that, where it's like, well, you got to do this, you got to do that. They have a certain ownership and possession of you in a good way. and then you reciprocate back with service. To
I
me,
guess my thing is that there's a pettiness to Agamemnon that strikes me as Gamma,
yeah, but
right?
like
Like,
the thing is like maybe it's like because it's like the air we breathe, I don't notice it the same way. It's like if you put Agamemnon and five other gammas of different shades, in a room together, he'd eat them alive. Like it's like I dig
so
it. Hold on,
okay, but what
hold
if
on,
you
hold on.
transported them to ancient Greece, or what if you made
They'd be rape
Agamemnon like?
slaves in like 5 minutes. Like it's not even close. Like the gamma of imagination and whatnot. They'd be somebody's toy in 5 minutes. But it's like what I'm trying to say is that while it was petty for him to take Achilles' war prize, and it was petty for Achilles to refuse Odysseus's embassy, where the man cries, "You've killed us all." uh, the how do I want to put it? Like Agamemnon had the power to take Briseis, and the
Yes.
Greeks would have accepted it as his due.
See, though, I'm not sure that they would have, according to the scene. Like, they did seem like it seems like Achilles. They agreed with him. Like, the general consensus seemed to be that Achilles' beef with Agamemnon, like his dispute with Agamemnon, Achilles was the one in the right, ultimately,
Yes.
right? Like, where Achilles went wrong was in two ways. Number one is that he not only refuses to fight, but he asks the gods to side with the Trojans so that they'll really feel it when he doesn't
Yes.
fight.
Now that
And the
part
second thing,
I'm not arguing about, by the way.
yeah, the second thing that Achilles does wrong is not accepting Agamemnon's original peace offering, which, by the way, is the peace offering he eventually accepts after Patroclus dies.
Right.
Uh,
But the thing is that to me this feels like it's Achilles making his choices. Like not Agamemnon making gamma choices, but Achilles making it. Like maybe you could say when Agamemnon runs up to his brother Menelaus, who has just captured son of a rich Trojan, and he goes, "Kill this son of a bitch. Don't forget that they cucked you, and kill him." Yeah, sure, that's kind of a gamma
I'm still
thing, but
not
I
sure
could
I would
also
agree with you
hold on.
that I'm not sure if I would agree that modern day gammas would all automatically be eaten alive by Agamemnon, because there's a lot of situations in Agamemnon's upbringing that's like, well, if you put the gamma in that upbringing, I'm not really sure.
Sure.
Like, he was raised with power. He was raised in, being the king. Like, if you raise a gamma with that idea, like, for example, one of like the obvious gammas, he's a sadist, is I don't like Game of Thrones. I've never watched Game of Thrones, but I know the story, like
Right.
in broad strokes. Joffrey,
Right.
right? In
Yes.
Game of Thrones. Really, really obvious, right? Like undisputed. Nobody I don't even think anybody who heard the comparison would argue, right? Like
Right.
he's a sadistic gamma, right?
Yes.
Um and he's also very weak, but he wants to be strong. Like I can imagine Joffrey as an adult. He's less sadistic. He's more, I should say, sorry, more sadistic than Agamemnon for sure. That's
Mm.
one of the character traits of Joffrey that makes him the
Excuse me.
special blend of person that he is. His sadism, uh, right? Like he's more sadistic than Agamemnon for sure. But I can imagine an adult Joffrey, raised in war, right? Trained by men throughout his life, challenging Agamemnon if he thought he was insulted, right?
Right.
Like, and I'm not so sure that, like, it would be that obvious, uh, that Agamemnon would definitely win that altercation were Joffrey trained to the same level, right?
So
Like,
I
you
think
get what I mean?
so. I think I've hit on why we disagree on this so much. My thing is that I do not believe that there is any martial vigor in a gamma by definition. The gamma fights specifically through words, side hits, freaking out, that sort of thing. With I think I might just need to get over that. because it's like there's no how do it's hard to excuse me. It's just hard to put my words into it because
I would
it's
agree with you that there's no natural aptitude for it. I just think that in the society that the Greeks grew up in, you either cultivate it or you die, especially in the world of the Iliad, right?
right. And
Like, this idea that there would be no gammas among the group of the Iliad because they're all fighters, I think is wrong,
I
especially considering the era.
the the uh the big thing I sort of mean for it is not so much that they are. I guess I should. I'll sort of slip it around. Essentially, I would say that it's not that they are have no gamma traits. I agree that certain actions they took were gamma. I believe that primarily, especially for Agamemnon and other like top tier leadership, that they are of the Bravo Alpha Sigma sort of spectrum with potential gamma traits. I understand what you're saying about martial vigor and stuff like that, and he's a Spartan. They definitely worked out, but like I think a gamma would fall away because I do have examples of Spartan gammas, traders mostly, and even if they're fit and whatnot, they're never threats physically. They're threats because they're selling out their people to the Persians or something for a bit of coin,
Well, I guess I
or
would
they're
go to like what's motivating Agamemnon in this case, right?
right.
Is Agamemnon right? Like, is he motivated by pride? Is he motivated, which isn't necessarily gamma, but can be, right? Depending on how it expresses itself. So, or how about this? We'll look at it in this way. How would the various steps on the hierarchy be motivated to fight? Omega, it's revenge, right?
Yes.
If you want to sell the Omega on how to fight, you have to point to them as the people who it's their fault that you are like this, so you need to kill them, right?
Yes.
That's how you would motivate them in the army. Okay. Gamma, or let me skip Gamma because we're going to go there later, right? Delta. Deltas are just motivated by they want to be seen as working hard, they want to be seen as contributors, right? So the Delta, you just say, serve your people, do your duty, right? And that's the bulk. This is why war stories often feature Deltas, right? They're one of the only genres of story that actually has, like, at least modern versions of it, that actually have Deltas in the leads when they're normally not. Because it's very conducive to an army, right?
Yes.
Being in the larger cog is something that the Delta would appreciate as long as they have a sense that they're a contributor. Okay. Bravo. What would motivate the Bravo? Well, what generally would motivate the Bravo, I think, would be loyalty to the Alpha, right?
Right.
So, personal loyalty, you might say. They know the Alpha. Let's say, if I don't know if Diomedes would be considered a Bravo or an Alpha, probably an Alpha, but he's sort of second in command to Odysseus, so I'm going to treat him like a Bravo. Like, Diomedes, he's like Odysseus's number 2. He is a king in his own right, though. He might be an Alpha, but whatever. I don't know if we have enough evidence to say either way.
I'd say, especially with like the eighth arrow, that there was a convincing argument to say that he was a Bravo.
In the eighth arrow, he's absolutely a Bravo. Like, there's no question about that. The eighth arrow makes that very clear. The Iliad, on the other hand, I'm not so sure, but I'm going to present him as a Bravo, right? Loyalty towards the Alpha is what motivates the Bravo. So, what motivates the Alpha? Well, what motivates the Alpha is some form of pride. Think like Trump, right?
Right.
But it's a specific type of, like, desire for glory, might be a way of putting it, right?
Sure.
The desire for history to remember you. The Gamma is also motivated by pride of a different sort. The Gamma has a sense that other people look down on them, they are lower in the hierarchy, so they want to make sure that they're compensating, right?
Right.
They want people to see them as not Gamma. So, what is motivating Agamemnon? Is it desire for glory, or is it fear that people will see him as less than what he wants to be? I think in the
Mm.
Iliad, I would argue, based on what we have seen of him, it is more the latter, especially in the dispute with Achilles, right? Because
Right.
again, it is clear that in the dispute with Achilles, uh, the the larger army believes Achilles is right. He has a point, and I already think Achilles is a gamma too, right? Like,
Right.
uh, I've made that argument. Um, but nevertheless, Achilles does have a point, right? His problem is in his inability to regulate his emotions, and which is a very gamma thing. You know, uh, he's entirely unregulated, and this causes issues for the whole army. That's why literally the problem is the rage of Achilles, right? Uh, Agamemnon's thing is that he is afraid that people are going to view him as less than what he is. He is not striving for more. He is driven by fear of being seen as less. That's why I view it more as gamma than alpha, if that makes sense.
Sure. I get you. It's I getcha, and I guess it's a matter of different culture. What looks like a gamma to the compare like what we would call a gamma, in Greek culture would be fundamentally different because quite frankly, I think the modern gamma would just be a slave. Treasonous, poisonous, not trustworthy at all, but still of the slave type because
It's like, though, imagine that you have that person who would absolutely like be a slave, but they are in fact the rightful king,
yeah.
right?
But the thing
Like, and
with
that's where you get Agamemnon.
Joffrey, is that he is cruel, but he's also weak, and he doesn't actually have any indication to strengthen himself, which is to me sort of the proof of the pudding. But like because there were plenty of people in ancient Greek and myth and whatnot who did not care for themselves in the same way that the soldiers did. Um, there's I'm thinking of like myths like Sisyphus and stuff like that. But
Yep, yep,
we've talked too long about this. Um,
we have.
I'll just
So
set this aside,
let's look at
mentally.
adaptations that I think are and aren't successful. I brought up the
Yeah.
Song of Achilles. The reason that I think, even if it is well written, which I cannot confirm or deny, and so I'm not going to claim it's not, right? Like, it
Hmm.
might be beautifully written. I really don't know. It is not a good adaptation, in my opinion, in an essential reason. Like, it doesn't capture the spirit of the Iliad,
Mm-hmm.
because the spirit of the Iliad, like, and I'm being serious about it. It sounds like I'm almost memeing, but I'm not. Like, the spirit of the Iliad is fundamentally not gay, right? Like, you by turning it gay, you've kind of broken something about what the Iliad is. You know, there's something about it that's just like very, very wrong.
mm.
Uh,
Uh,
Going to different adaptations. So I'm thinking of like Percy Jackson, the Olympian. So this is the. Did you read this as a kid?
no. Nope.
So
Nope. Nope.
I
Nope.
did, but I was already into Greek myths before I read it. I was one of those people, you know.
One of
So
those
I read
people.
it because I was into Greek myths. It did not get me into Greek mythology.
Right.
I enjoyed the series. Rick Riordan went off the deep end. It's one of those things where, like, now that we know that Rick Riordan is a nutcase SJW, and he really is, by the way, like, he is absolutely, like, off his rocker, unacceptably, like, putting trans stuff into kids, putting gay relationships into kids' books, right?
Yes.
Selling it as mainstream, like, he's absolutely a lunatic. Uh,
I
but
agree.
now that you know it, if you could kind of search for it in the original, but if you weren't searching for it, you wouldn't see it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I mean,
So
it's
I don't really. I think that the Percy Jackson series overall was pretty good. Um, it had some clever things that they would do, and Rick Riordan's writing style was very breezy and fun. Uh, Percy has a very strong narrative voice. His chapter titles were always top tier as well.
mm-hmm.
He would name them like, my homework gets eaten by a hydra or something like that. Um,
Right.
so they were always very fun. I think what made it a good or bad adaptation. So, well, I think what made it a good adaptation of the Greek myths, and this is an adaptation of the Greek myths. It's a modernization and adaptation. Uh, I think it does kind of keep to the core of of the stories and the ideas behind it, right? There's also just the fact that it's hard for me to explain except to say that on a technical level, Rick Riordan was a very competent writer, you know, and is a very competent writer. So just by virtue of the Greek myths are very interesting, he is retelling these sorts of stories with very competent writing, fun characters. It's breezy. I don't think there's anything special about them that makes it like this is a way to adapt a myth so much as just Riordan is pretty good and he's working his own magic with it in that sense. You know what I mean?
Yes, I agree. That people talk about it. I watched the first movie. Uh,
Oh, the movie's bad.
oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, that was
Um,
okay.
the second movie actually captures the sense of humor of the books better because the books were pretty funny. And it's still not a good movie. The first movie's just like not good at all.
Okay. Um, all right. Okay. I don't
At least
remember it well enough to say actually, so
it's
I'm just
fair.
kind of stuck.
At least let me put it this way: you might enjoy it, and there are things about it to enjoy, like the fact that Logan Lerman who played the lead,
Yeah.
was a very good Percy. Um, it didn't capture the books at all. It didn't capture the flavor of it. Uh, so I would say, in that sense, there were some things that Riordan did with the myths that were kind of clever. Some of them that were a little bit too clever by half, I think, where it was like, trying a little too hard to be original. But for example, I really like the idea of him meeting Cersei, and Cersei is now turning men into guinea pigs instead of pigs because it's, just easier to take care of. Uh, which is a pretty good gag and a funny joke. Uh, Actually, the book Sea of Monsters, which is the second Percy Jackson book, is an adaptation of the Odyssey, which I only realized when I was like looking up the Odyssey years later. Uh, but it actually has like a lot of the events of the Odyssey in it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
they have to get they're trying to find the Golden Fleece, which is being held by Polyphemus for some reason. Uh, I don't remember if they ever explain how Polyphemus got the Golden Fleece, but
Huh?
whatever. He had it. So you have a lot of the events of the Odyssey. Percy, instead of a bag of wind, they give Percy a thermos full of wind, which I guess is kind of a clever update. Uh, the Cersei turns men into guinea pigs. I did like the idea they had the option of either going through Scylla, going through Carabotus, or the Clashing Rocks, and they decide that they're going to try and get through. I think they decide they're going to try and get through Scylla because they had a battleship, so they just hammer it with cannons, uh, which is pretty dope. Uh, yeah, no, I've, and they even had they had the great joke of Percy's friend Grover, who was a satyr, was kidnapped by Polyphemus, who of course is half blind. So in order to avoid being eaten, he dresses up in a wedding dress and pretends to be a woman, and then says that he will marry Polyphemus when he finishes his shroud, which is of course the story from the Odyssey.
Yes.
And he unthreads it at each night, and then he goes, "Oh, well." Polyphemus realizes being unthreaded. And he goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, my lovely wife. Your thing's being unthreaded. Well, don't worry. This happened to me once before. I have magic thread,"
Huh?
which was a pretty good joke too. So yeah, um, there are some interesting parts of it though. Like one thing that you get when you actually read the stories of the Greek heroes is that the sons of gods don't have any special powers per se. They're just like stronger than everyone else, right?
Right.
Now, I can understand why somebody making an adaptation, like, even if I were doing it, to be honest, it's kind of hard to resist of, like, the sons of Poseidon have, ocean powers, and the sons of Zeus have thunder powers, and whatever. But, like, I would probably do that too, just because, like, it's really fun. You know, you get to give everybody cool superpowers, but
Yeah.
That's not actually what we see in the myths. And if you think about it, that makes sense because those aren't like the powers they were born with. It's not genetic. They literally drew lots. You know, um, like they weren't. Zeus wasn't born with the lightning powers. He got control of the sky, right?
Right.
So yeah, I guess that's my thought on Percy Jackson. I don't think there's much to it. I think that in the modern day there was a push for a while where like Tumblr and that sort especially tried to push Percy Jackson as the superior Harry Potter alternative when they turned on Rowling. Uh, and they tried to go like, yeah, it was always the better series. Like in reality, it's good, it's fine, right?
Right.
Is it better than Harry Potter? Probably not. Like, is it worse? Also, probably not. It's just kind of like if it's a different vibe in some ways. It's fine. It's a good, solid young adult series,
Yeah.
right? There isn't much to say about like, oh, it was always better. Like, yeah, it had some awkward stuff. It had things I would have done differently. The ending was kind of rushed, whatever,
Yeah.
right? But overall, I still recommend it. I just like get it used so that you don't give Rick Riordan money.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, Other adaptations. John C. Wright. He did adaptations in his Nightland books, and these are probably the best that I've read
Mm-hmm.
in terms of adaptation of Greeks. Although it's not really adaptations of mythology, but of Greek stories.
Right.
But yeah, Awake in the Night. Silence in the Night is an adaptation, a loose adaptation of the Aeneid, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, Last of All
Well,
Suns is not.
inspired by,
It's
I'd say, I guess.
Yeah, the most direct adaptation of the four is definitely Cry of the Night Hound, right?
Yep.
Uh, Cry of the Night Hound is actually like a very, believe it or not, it's a very direct adaptation of Antigone. Like you could actually map it out pretty one to one of like where he's getting the ideas. You know,
Oh yeah.
uh, I would say Cry of the Night Hound's a really interesting story because it is not neither of our favorites, but it's also neither of our least favorite, and it's probably the story that I talk about the most because it has the most ideas in
Yes.
some ways. I guess The Last of All Suns does, but
Well,
it has a lot of ideas worth talking about.
it's interesting because it's a concept that we don't consider as much as people might want to think, and that being like fatherhood and a son's duty to his father and stuff like that. Like it's got some deep meaning to it that's
You're
almost
thinking of the
alien to
third
the.
story. I'm thinking of the second.
Sorry, I thought we were talking about the third story.
I
Uh,
mean, it's fine. It's still a good, good insight. But
Never mind. Don't worry about it. I don't know.
uh,
Anthony, it's pretty good. It's great. Uh, it's a must read, and it was Castalia House's first leather printed book for a reason. Uh,
yeah, Awake in the Nightland is honestly like it's one of the best books I've ever read. It still stands as one of the best books I've ever read. It's an absolute masterpiece.
yeah.
Um, is it John C. Wright's best book? Like it's sort of yes and no, right? Like that's arguable. You could push like maybe Iron Chamber of Memory. I know you really love.
I, I
People.
I still wouldn't call Iron Chamber of Memory his best book, but it's the one that spoke most to me.
Yeah, that's fair. But Awake in the Nightland was the book that made me like, and I'm sure it did for many, like a real John C. Wright fan. I had read The Last Guardian of Everness.
Hmm.
I liked it. I thought it was a good book. I tried to read The Golden Age. I didn't get into it. It just kind of threw so many ideas out at me that it didn't really feel very human, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Um, so it wasn't my thing. So I ended up dropping The Golden Age. I did finish The Last Guardian of Everness. I don't think I finished The Mists of Everness for some reason. I don't know why. I really should have. Uh, but anyway, I liked The Last Guardian of Everness. It led me to seek out more John C. Wright stuff because it was good. But it was definitely not like, it was not master level. Awake in the Nightland was the book where I read and I was like, holy crap, who is this guy?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
you know,
It made me.
especially the the ending of the first story always stuck with me when he
Yes.
goes like, there on the footprint, and on the mosaic there was the prophecy of two people walking back, but only one set of footprints went in.
Mm.
I remember reading that line and the end of that story, and you know how in like the best stories, the really great ones, the truly superversive ones, honestly, you kind of have that moment of chills where you're just like, clearly something has happened here, where like the muse has touched down, right?
Yes.
Uh, you get that moment at the end of Awake in the Night, right? I always remember that reading the end of that story and just being like, wow, that was an experience.
Yes.
Uh,
There's it's good. If you haven't read Awake in the Nightline, you have to read it. I'll do a couple now.
yep.
The one that just ended recently that was pretty famous, pretty big, was Lore Olympus, which is a
Oh, it
retelling.
ended. I
It
didn't know
ended.
that.
It had one of the worst drawn fist fights I've ever seen in my life between Uranos and Helios. But a woman wrote it, so that's what you get. Uh,
I'm
I
actually
shouldn't.
curious about this. Is it actually good? Like, I've never been sure.
It is. Uh, you might get something out of it. So most Olympus comics, especially ones with Hades and Persephone as a main focus, make Hades one of those sensitive gamma types, like the musician type without the alpha, because they think that's what girls get. It's the gamma fantasy. Uh, but in reality, what she does that makes it interesting is that makes Hades an alpha. Of course, everything is tainted from the true Greek masculine, but sorry.
Nevertheless.
Nevertheless, people have therapists and stuff. It's disgusting, disgusting. Uh,
The Greeks would laugh in the face of your therapy.
I know, right? What, your therapist can't throw a javelin, huh? You throw some javelins, you'll get those feelings right up. We'll go raiding in Egypt, easy peasy. Except you're facing off against the Ramses and not one of the bad ones, and it's like, oh no. Uh, the but it's interesting because it plays up like Apollo gets questionable consent from Persephone and they have sex, that sort of thing. And it's sort of like there are moments that are truly interesting, truly great to read, where like Hades threatens what are those guys who takes pictures in Hollywoods of celebrities?
Paparazzi?
Paparazzi. Like he threatens a paparazzi by ripping his eye out. Like there are scenes where like you could actually see these gods acting as gods, but then it's like Hera divorced Zeus in the end. No, absolutely not. There's no way in any
Ew.
level of Tartarus, Nine Hell, or anything else that Hera, the goddess of marriage, would consider divorce to Zeus, king of the gods. It ends like that. So, like there's some great
No,
scenes, but
that would
it's
be Hera admitting to an unbelievable failure on her part. She would never admit that.
exactly, exactly. Like you have to understand, this is like one of the last five panels. Uh, but like the guy, the male characters act convincingly like alphas. Um, the different characters, like Adonis is like gay but straight at the same time. Like all these different things are exactly as what you expect. Um, could have been better. It's probably the best comic adaptation that I know of. There's another adaptation that was like set where the Olympian gods are actually super advanced space aliens, and it's like Zeus against Kronos as they go through different civilizations and pretend to be different gods of their civilization, and it just doesn't work. It does not work. It worked for a little bit and then it fell apart. Um, like with Lore Olympus, especially in the beginning, it's very strong, and it keeps a lot of that strength until the end, where I think it's more of a question of author burnout than it is skill, particularly. Um, Also, the fact that, she had plenty of time to work on the beginning. Like, guess what? Even though you don't want to be rewriting forever, it does help sometimes. Uh, so, it's worth a read, at least to a certain point. Um, I can't really say more than that on it. Uh, they get the alpha stuff down right for some of it, uh, but it kind of gets ridiculous and unfocused by the end. The other one that's pretty good. Uh, did I just forget? Hold on. Lord Olympus. Most of the comics make Hades a gamma, even though he'd clearly be like a sigma male. You know, he's got that.
Yeah, Hades does have that Sigma vibe to him, doesn't he?
Oh yeah. I'm trying to think.
It's odd the way that
Oh.
the ancient Greeks viewed him. It's very odd. Like,
Oh yeah.
one thing is that if you want to do modern adaptations, there's this really weird thing where people are like, well, actually, his relationship with Persephone was relatively positive. He didn't cheat on her or whatever, which is true. Then you go, like, except for the kidnapping. And you just kind of have to go, like, most modern versions kind of just take out the kidnapping bit.
They do.
And I don't blame them, by the way. Like, I don't even think that's necessarily a bad decision, right? Like,
I disagree.
it's just.
I straight
What
up
was that?
I straight up disagree.
Oh, you don't think they should ever take it out?
I don't think they should ever take it out. I think it works. Like you can have, and they took it out of Lore Olympus, so you have to understand. Like the beginning writing is pretty darn good, but that's also because they're past chariots and into cars. Uh, uh, so there's a couple of reasons for that. One, Persephone has less agency than people ascribe to her in the Greek myths. Demeter has tons of agency. Hera has absolutely loads of agency. But Persephone tends to be quiet and retiring compared to other people in her myths, especially compared to, like I said, her mother and Hera. She does have funerary rites and dread mysteries, but it's not the same as. Uh, but it's not the same as what someone might do for Hera, Artemis, Athena, or whatever. You compare that to. Sorry, no, not to compare that to. You. Uh, there's a certain secret knowledge to the kidnapping that is lost when there is no kidnapping. It goes from beyond some sort of Persephone is joined to the king of hell in some sort of like equal partnership or whatever, even though they have a pretty solid relationship compared to the other gods. I don't think he cheats on her, which is pretty impressive. Um, Maybe once or twice, I think. Which again, very low numbers, like practically a saint at this point. Uh,
I don't remember him ever cheating on her, but it could
there's,
be in a more obscure myth.
I think Persephone turns her into a. Oh yeah, it's in Lore Olympus, so that's why I'm remembering it. I can't remember any of the characters' names, but she gets turned into a plant, and that's very famous for its medicinal properties or something like that. I can't remember. It's not very important, and probably added after the main myths were, codified in the minds of the priests and the myth makers and whatnot. Uh, and I'm trying to think here. With Persephone as goddess of spring and also goddess of Hades, she lacks agency, which I think forces sort of Hades' actions rather than would allow him to claim her as a wife, as did like Zeus and Hera or Poseidon and Amphitrite. Uh, it like I can't. The way I can explain it, like I can talk around this stuff, but functionally, my writer brain says it must be a kidnapping. Persephone would not go with anyone willingly, and it's not like she would refuse or gull Hades or whatever. It's that there was no options and that there was no choice for her to make except for, someone else making the choice for her, like the turn of the seasons. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So it's to me it's also very romantic compared to other stories, quite frankly. And apparently people ruin it, but it's like, well, Zeus set it up for him. It's like they didn't consult her though. He's like, go for it, Hades. I'll talk to Demeter about it. Okay, so he kidnaps Persephone, and then Zeus doesn't tell Demeter. A Zeus moment of all time.
It really is.
It really is. Zeus. If ever somebody goes like Zeus is Gamma, I'm like, no. I will literally bleed out
Oh,
my
that
lifeblood rather than accept that.
I want to say that is legitimately one of the most, like, I don't know, brain dead, absolutely insane takes I have ever heard. Zeus is like kind of the embodiment of the ideal of the alpha in all of its positives and negatives.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Anyway, because sometimes it feels like everyone's an alpha, and it's like, sorry, no, everyone's a gamma, and it's like, no, no,
No, that's absolutely insane.
yes,
Zeus is ultra alpha.
yes. So I will die on that hill that Zeus is alpha. Not that anyone's
Yes.
said that he's gamma. To be clear, I'm just saying, on the potential, especially when like,
Well, I would say Zeus is alpha. I would say from what we see of Poseidon, he's alpha
oh,
because
definitely
they have
alpha.
yeah, they have that moment in the Iliad where Zeus tells them all to get out for now, right? He'll let them go back later. And he says, and if you disagree and you want to fight me, uh I'm trying to think of how he put it. Like, and if you want to fight me, go ahead. I dare you. Right? Like
Yes,
Zeus says this to them, and literally challenging all of the gods to take him on single-handedly, and they all collectively agree that this would be a bad idea because Zeus would probably win.
yes,
The only god who considers it briefly is Poseidon because he's so insulted that Zeus feels like he has the right to meddle in his decisions.
right,
That Poseidon briefly considers it, but then he's like, no, no, it would be a bad idea, but like,
yes.
he better not do this again. Uh,
Because in myth, he's very much a fight me, bro kind of person. Poseidon.
yes. Uh, yep, he is. I mean, they have the myth of Medusa and Athena, but like, that kind of came later. It's unclear how, so I don't know if we should really count that as part of like the core of the Poseidon
Mm,
mythology or not. Uh,
right.
but yeah. Yeah, I would say that Zeus comes across as alpha, Poseidon comes across as alpha, Hades if he comes across as anything, which he normally really doesn't because they don't talk about him much,
Oh
but
yeah,
it's
terrified.
Sigma.
Yes.
Yeah, if he comes across as anything, it's Sigma, but he kind of really doesn't come across as much just because they tried to avoid talking about him. Uh, so there isn't like as much of a personality to Hades, to be honest with you. Uh, I actually think that the Hades game does a pretty decent job with Hades' personality.
I'll be back in a minute.
Oh no. All right, well Ben runs off. I wish I could add more to what he was saying about Lore Olympus, but I cannot because I have not read it. So I'm going to mention other things while he is gone. Uh Epic the Musical. We talked about it once. It was literally our least popular stream ever. Absolutely nobody listened to it.
It was not
Uh
least popular ever.
it was on the list. It was pretty low. Uh like almost nobody listened to it. All right, you're back. You want to finish your thing on Lore Olympus? I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just didn't know how long I'd have to fill.
No, no, no. I got my headphone on. I just can't talk. No, I'm done with Lore Olympus. Talk about Epic.
Okay. Yeah, so Epic recently released its Thunder Saga, the most recent thing. First, I'm a big right, like I'm the big fan of Epic here. Ben enjoyed it, but not as much as I did, which is to be expected because his taste in music is slightly different than mine. Uh, I admire Jorge greatly as a lyricist. I mean, I don't admire him as a person. I don't know him as a person. I don't care about him as a person. But as a lyricist, I am greatly admire him. My favorite saga of Epic is the Cyclops saga. So actually, let's talk a little bit about this. The decisions that Jorge made in adapting the Odyssey, because I think this is really interesting. Uh, so the first thing he did is the death of Astyanax. We should say like the murder of Astyanax, because it was a murder, at least by modern standards. I would certainly consider it as such. Uh, the murder of Astyanax. In the myths, some myths say that it was Odysseus that did it. Someone gives it to a rando that I don't remember the name of. Not very important. Jorge, the creator, Jorge Rivera Harams, the creator of Epic the Musical, had the brilliant idea of uh, making it Odysseus, who was the guy who drops Astyanax off the wall. This is not mentioned in the Odyssey, which means it was probably added later to the myths, or at the very least, they didn't consider it an important enough part of his story to even bring it up. Which makes me think it must have been added later, because this would be a pretty big deal, even in ancient Greece. They
Yes.
consider killing babies a big deal. Uh, so it was probably added later. Uh, it also isn't always Odysseus that did it. Like, there are other versions of the story where someone else does it. But in some versions, it is Odysseus. So, Jorge has the brilliant conceit of making it Odysseus and making this a major part of Odysseus's character arc. So, we start off the story with the horse and the infant, where we have Odysseus and the Trojan horse. And then Zeus tells him, I have a mission, but I don't think you can handle it. And Odysseus is like, no, give it to me. I'm ready. And then he tells him, you gotta kill this baby. Because if you don't, he's gonna grow up and kill everyone.
Yeah.
This is like the centering moment of Odysseus's character arc in Epic, which I think is a brilliant idea. Uh, Absolutely great narrative decision to center Odysseus's arc on. It then turns into like what makes a man a monster, and how ruthless do I need to be in order to survive, and how ruthless is acceptable, right? That becomes like the narrative questions, and by starting off the story with the in mythology, like he didn't make it up wholesale. The murder of Astyanax is a great way of setting off the story. So
Mm.
the way that the story then advances is that there are minor characters in the Odyssey that Odysseus expands. Eurylochus in the Odyssey is presented as somewhat cowardly and kind of pathetic, but in Epic, without really changing anything substantial that he does, is sort of reimagined as the voice of the crew. So he is the representative of the will of the crew. And you have his best friend Pylades is also in Epic the Musical. Pylades is actually mentioned in passing in the Odyssey as Odysseus's childhood friend. So once again, Jorge didn't entirely make this up, but he literally gets one line, like in the Circe incident, you know, like, and Jorge expands his role. So they make it. He turns the story into a clash of ideals. Of Eurylochus is about do whatever it takes to get the crew home because he represents the will of the crew. Therefore, he's in favor of doing anything that would mean the crew surviving. Right? Pylades, on the other hand, has a philosophy that in the musical is represented in a song called "Open Arms." So we'll call his philosophy "Open Arms." That if you embrace the world with open arms and lead with trust, you're more like then good things will happen. Well, this is ancient Greece, so obviously Pylades dies. Uh, this is that's both a meme but also serious. Like his death was inevitable as soon as he did Open Arms. Like it was always going to happen.
Yes.
Uh, right, and once again, this is a major shift in the way that Odysseus thinks going forward. Right, that uh, Athena tells him to be ruthless and kill the Cyclops. Odysseus refuses, then foolishly gives the Cyclops his name. Uh, Although, to be fair to Odysseus, unlike in the Odyssey, where Odysseus's decision was even stupider, because the crew is literally begging him not to do it, and he knew that the Cyclops was the son of Poseidon. I mean, at the very least, we have to assume he knew because he's saying it as he's telling the story, and like nobody told him, so like he must have known.
Right.
Like so, which makes it just an impossibly stupid decision that Odysseus makes in the Odyssey. Um, in Epic, it's a little bit more excusable because Odysseus clearly doesn't know that the Cyclops is the son of Poseidon. Like clearly, when it's brought up later, he is surprised by this. So like, and the entire crew is. So literally, nobody knew. So I guess you could be like, well, why would Odysseus assume that he could do anything about the fact that he's going to Ithaca, right? Like, I guess I wouldn't. It's still a mistake though, right? Athena
Okay.
says he should have just killed the Cyclops, gets angry and leaves. This is not in the original poem, uh, right? Which is interesting itself. So now we've centered the narrative arc on what do you do to survive, right? Like what is worth doing? How ruthless do you need should you be to survive? This then culminates in the next part of the story, which is Eurylochus. You learn later that's Eurylochus, so you don't know at the time when you first listen to it. Odysseus manages to convince Aeolus to bag up the storm that's blocking their way into a windbag. Uh, and then Eurylochus and the crew open the bag inside of Ithaca because they think that Odysseus might be lying to them, and then it might contain treasure. This leads them directly to Poseidon, who kills off most of Odysseus's crew, leaving him with only one ship when he started with 600 men. All right, so and Poseidon
Like,
relays.
just remember, we have had a stream about this, Anthony.
Yeah, I wanted
They,
to go. The reason I'm mentioning this is for the narrative reason. Poseidon has his own philosophy, which is that ruthlessness is mercy upon yourself. So Poseidon's idea at this moment is sort of the reverse of lead with trust and then good things will happen. He's saying, no, if you want things to go well for yourself, you need to be ruthless. Uh,
mm,
well, now you have going into the underworld. They change the story. Jorge again changes the story in the Odyssey. Tiresias actually gives Jorge. Sorry, Jorge. Wow, I'm thinking of Jorge as the lead. Odysseus actually gives Odysseus fairly good news. Uh, he tells Odysseus that things are actually going like, yeah, things could be better, but they could be worse at home, right? Your mom is dead. Your dad's not doing great, and suitors are in your house, but everybody is alive, and your wife hasn't married anyone yet, right? So there's
mm-hmm.
still a chance, right? And then he tells him, and you can solve this Poseidon thing as long as you go off and make sacrifices, right? So he gives Odysseus actionable advice and okay news, right? In Epic the Musical, he does not do this in one of my favorite songs because, again, lyrically, I consider it brilliant. No Longer You. He gives Odysseus a much more vague prophecy where he tells Odysseus that he sees a man who will make it home alive, but it's no longer you. Implying that Odysseus is going to need to change into someone different if he's going to survive, which is exactly what the final song of Act 1 indicates, called Monster. Odysseus has decided that he has had enough. He will become the monster. Uh, and he is no longer going to let, other people dictate, right, how
mm.
merciful he will or will not be. He's going to be the ruthless one. All right, so that brings us to the most recent thing, the Thunder Saga. One of the things I love about Epic is that I consider some of their songs and interpretations to be like the version of that song, and one of them is Thunderbringer, right? So I love Thunderbringer. I love the lyrics of Thunderbringer. It's lyrically, like, it's insane how good the lyrics of Thunderbringer are. This is the Zeus song, and I watched this in Livestream, and in Livestream, he starts it off very intimidatingly. So the story at this point goes that Odysseus learns from the sirens that the only way for him to survive is to go through the lair of Scylla. Before they go through the lair of Scylla, that is the monster with 6 heads. Odysseus says Scylla has a cost. So clearly he knows something. Now, if you read the Odyssey, Odysseus does say that he knows if you go through Scylla's lair, right, or Scylla's territory, I don't think it's a lair in the original poem. I think it's open sea. Uh, but if you go through Scylla's territory, 6 crew members are always going to die because Scylla has 6 heads. She will always take 6 people, and there is no way around it. Odysseus opts not to tell the crew this because it's the only way they can make it home, right? So, and it's not presented in the Odyssey as a moral quandary, right? Because it's like they literally had no other choice. He would just have been panicking the crew. Once again, Jorge makes what I think is a brilliant decision here of taking this moment that is just kind of in passing in the Odyssey and turning it into a moral low point for Odysseus. So before they go through the lair of Scylla, Odysseus knows, he has said earlier, so we know he knows, Scylla has a cause, right? He does not tell the crew. Then Eurylochus tells him, I'm the one who opened the wind bag, right? I'm so, I apologize. I wish I didn't do it, but I opened the bag of wind. Okay. So Odysseus tells him, Eurylochus, light up 6 torches and hands them out to 6 crew members. So Odysseus picks 6 men to die. Now, when you watch the animatic that goes with the live stream, which is canon for according to Jorge, right, the one that goes with the original live stream,
Yes.
the Eurylochus is handed a torch, and he is described earlier in the story as being like a brother to Odysseus. So this is supposed to be like a huge moral turning point, right? Eurylochus drops it in the skirmish with Scylla, which is how he survives. But he makes it out, and this segues into mutiny. So Eurylochus mutinies, fights Odysseus. The crew turns on Odysseus when they realize that he sacrificed 6 men in order to make it through Scylla alive. And then they kill, as in the beginning of the Odyssey indicates, the sacred cattle of Helios. And immediately, interestingly, in the storytelling, immediately they decide that they are going to move forward with Eurylochus, or like they're going to move forward with Odysseus as the leader again. Because after the cow is killed, Odysseus is so like, holy crap, we gotta move, that they immediately just kind of fall in line behind him. Like, it's actually kind of funny because they're like, they just stabbed him. He's been knocked out. He's like tied to a pole. And then he's like, you've doomed us all, Eurylochus. Everybody leave. We gotta run now. And they all immediately listen to Odysseus. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
But anyway, so, and that leads to my favorite song, which is Thunderbringer. And once again, we have a major change from the original. So, in the original Odyssey, things proceed kind of similarly. There is no mutiny, right? I don't think they would have mutiny. First off, the Scylla incident doesn't happen, remember? Like, he doesn't mark 6 men for death. Nobody even would have disagreed with this decision, right? Like, they had to get through Scylla. There was no other option, So there's no real moral quandary here. However, they do kill the sacred cattle of Helios in the Odyssey. Odysseus is against it. He doesn't kill them. So when Zeus destroys the ship and drowns everyone, Odysseus survives. I don't think it's ever said explicitly, but this is presumably he survives because he was the only one who didn't actually touch the cattle.
I thought they did say that, but maybe they just implied it and I was mistaking it.
Or I could be forgetting. I don't know. Either way, like it's in the story, right? Like,
yes,
it's pretty clear that the reason Odysseus survives is, unlike the rest of the crew, he did not touch the cattle. So, in the version that happens in Epic, his crew kill the cattle. Odysseus starts panicking. The line he uses, actually, "You've doomed us all, Eurylochus." It's like a really intense moment. And he gathers everyone together and says, we need to get away from this island now. And they start rowing away. And then it ends with, we're too late, and Zeus arrives. So, the reason I love Thunderbringer is because, to me, this is the Zeus song. Jorge describes it in the live stream. He has a little thing where he goes like, the king of the gods, the one true divine has arrived. And then it goes like song 24, Thunderbringer. Which really sets the stage for what happens. It's also interesting that in Epic, Zeus is the only god who never gets an introduction, in the sense of his name is never spoken, right, at any point, because you don't need to. It's not necessary. You know exactly who it is. Uh,
Oh yeah.
and it's a fantastic song. Lyrically, it's one of my favorites. It starts off with Zeus monologues a bit about pride, which he makes an analogy that pride is like a damsel in distress, and that he can have his way with her because he's Zeus, right? Uh, she hides away, and only he is allowed to undress her, for he is the king of the gods. The implication here is that they have become prideful when only Zeus is allowed to be prideful, because Zeus can handle it and they can't, right?
Right.
And then, after he monologues about this, which is Jorge talked about this. I thought it was a brilliant idea, where he says that he intentionally made it so that Zeus literally spent like the entire first half of the song not addressing the situation at all, because he was Zeus. So as far as he was concerned, everybody had to listen to whatever he said anyway, no matter what it was, right? Like, he can monologue about whatever he wanted, and they were literally a captive audience. Uh, and then he says, "Tell me, Odysseus, if I were to make you choose the lives of your men and crew or your own, why do I think they'd lose?" And he gives Odysseus a choice: you or your crew. Uh, so, of course, Odysseus had, in a great idea, he has the crew singing on one side, and then Odysseus looks and sees a vision of Penelope, and she's singing, "I will take the suffering from you."
Made of
That line,
clouds.
what was
Im-
that?
Implied to be conjured by Zeus.
Yeah, in the one animatic at least.
No, there's thunder. There's a thunder strike after she finishes her lines.
Oh, that's true, yeah. What's so interesting about that, though, is that if you watch the full Thunder Saga, Penelope never says that. The character that says that is the Siren at the beginning of the Thunder Saga, right? Like, which is such a clever idea. Like, I love that detail. That it is Odysseus's loyalty to the crew versus not the real Penelope, right? But the version of Penelope that Odysseus has imagined in his head, who is waiting for him at home. A version of Penelope who can take the suffering from him, which of course is impossible, right? Uh, but it makes his decision to choose Penelope make more sense and more in character, right?
Yeah.
I love the detail when you watch the live stream and in the animatic that you looked at, Ben. In the live stream too, this was very intense to watch live. The crew literally rushes Odysseus while Zeus rises into the air and strikes the boat with a thunderbolt. It's an amazing scene. It's incredibly intense. And then it is implied then that, of course, Odysseus will wash up on Ogygia, which is the island of Calypso. And the boat shatters into pieces, and the rest of the men all drown or were electrocuted. But yeah, the things I love about Epic, I really love that that's probably the most accurate portrayal of Zeus honestly in an adaptation that I have ever seen. Like, I would seriously go that far, because the thing is that most adaptations sort of forget that Zeus isn't just the most powerful. He is, like, by far the most powerful, right?
Yep.
He is more powerful than everyone else combined. There is nobody on the level of Zeus, right? Like, nobody even close to the level of Zeus. And Thunderbringer really manages to keep this, because we've met other gods, right? Like, Poseidon in Ruthlessness is very powerful, but there's something to, like, the authority that Zeus speaks with in Thunderbringer, right? This
Yep.
way of talking where he has, like, I make the decisions, right? You know, someone has to die today, and you have got the final say, right? Like, in other
Yes.
words, like, I have decided, you're choosing. You know, Odysseus begs no, and Zeus is like, nope, this is what's happening. Right? This idea that even though the crew has been blinded by their pride, but Zeus can handle it, right? Like
Yes.
Zeus can handle pride. He can be as proud as he wants because he's Zeus. Uh, you can't be prideful. You need to know your place, right? Uh, it's great. It's really good. I also really like the song that will come up later, but he's already released it in like portions and people have pieced it together into one video. The Challenge, which is Penelope's song. It's another one where it's like the reason I love the song so much is that to me it's like the Penelope song, right? When you listen to it, he
Hmm.
does a really good job of distilling the essence of who Penelope is as a person. You know,
Right.
uh, yeah. So I was very the Thunder Saga still is not my favorite because I think the first two songs, especially the second, were a little weak. Honestly, the second song, which is called Different Beast, even though it has a lot of cool ideas, which is like Odysseus reveals that he was using he was just speaking to the siren to get information on where to go, and in reality, his crew has captured them and is now going to cut off their tails and let them drown in the water. Uh, it's a very cool idea. I like it conceptually, but I don't like the song very much. Yeah, I just don't like the beat. I don't. I think lyrically it's too on the nose, right? Uh,
Hmm.
but this is all contrasted with the fact that Scylla, Mutiny, and Thunderbringer are three of the best songs in the entire thing. So, like, it's kind of it's not my favorite overall saga, but it has some of the high points I think in the entire thing. So yeah, epic, still good, still going. Uh, and in terms of like what we were talking about, which is like the art of adaptation, I think the biggest strength of Epic is first in making decisions. The decisions that Jorge makes to change are not arbitrary decisions, but serve a specific theme, right?
Hmm.
Like, he is trying to create a sort of moral tension here, and every change he's made has served to push this tension. And a lot of it is even like creative reinterpretations. Like, the whole thing with Scylla, for example, is a great. It's a great example of that, right? Where it's like that is in the Odyssey, but in the Odyssey they don't really make anything of it. But Jorge has recontextualized it in Epic the musical into something very different. Uh, so yeah. Any other? Did you want to add? I think you said you want a second. You had a second thing you had to talk about, right, Ben?
Yeah, I did. The second one I wanted to talk about uh, was Fantastes, which has a lot of interesting Greek themes in it, uh, but it serves more as a bridge between fable and myth and to sort of modern fantasy in the sense of like modern from, you know, like if you consider it, you had like the myth era, right? Ragnarok and the classic myths we're talking about, and then you have this sort of interim period where you have things like Beowulf, Siegfried, and King Arthur. Then you push it forward a bit, then you have like Grimm's fairy tales. Then again, another level, and you start having sort of the formation of modern literature, Gothic novels, different genres appear, springing up like Myrmidons. And I think Fantastes works as a bridge, a numinous bridge between a lot of different genres of well historical pieces. There's elements of the knight errant. There's sort of this element of I wouldn't want to call it like hidden gods, but there's things beyond mortal kin with power in it over Anodos, which is a Greek name meaning youth, as he goes around with it, but it's still full of the fairy tale and myth of the English countryside, Scottish countryside as well. So you have something that's far more complex than just a simple, oh, it's an adaptation of Greek myths. No, it carries a certain spirit from them that is lying underneath things. There's implications of hidden pagan rituals and more. It's how Enidos dies in the end. Suppose kind of dies, sort of. It's not the focus, but it's definitely up there. I do think I'm with. I wish I had, an Aeneid one, an Iliad, a real proper like sort of Trojan War story. Um, like they do with HBO Rome and whatnot. And more to it. I wish there was just more to it. And I think that they wouldn't be able to because they might make it gay or they might make it black or something that it just isn't is. Put Patroclus in a dress or something stupid like that. Um, and I think, or make Zeus out to be, not king of the gods, but instead some sort of venal rapist or something. There's a lot to what we have that we can hope for, but we just won't see it. What's funny is if you like watch how Zuckerberg has been improving over his life. He's going from like Bugman to like surfing, and he's like, wow. When Trump got shot, I was so surprised. He, stood up and pumped his fist, and it's like I'm pretty soon he's gonna go on like Tren or something and really work out. I believe this, Anthony. I believe the spirit of the Greeks will overcome Zuckerberg's weak spirit and make him the Agamemnon of social
Yep.
media. Yes, yes. But no, the Fantasties is just something I think people should consider because it has a certain amount of spirit from there that I think people miss out on because what they do is they only look as far as um, sort of the face of it, the genre of it, and not actually the spirit of it. Where Tumos and manliness is as much a part of um, Fantastes as it is as part of the spiritual journey of Anados. Which if I could lay one charge against the Greeks, it is that they did not understand character arcs for some of this stuff. They did not have like the boy became a man. The boy did not go on a journey to become a man, and maybe that's more Western European than it is Greek. But I don't know. I don't know the meaning behind it. It's something that just came
Yeah,
to me as we
building
were
is Roman
talking.
is kind of a Western-ish idea.
Mm. Well, to be fair to us, we don't have war constantly and forever, um, and we don't view ourselves as becoming a god. So, you know, do you have any last words, Anthony?
Uh, I went long on Epic by choice, knowing that we were going to be close to the end, so I don't really regret it. But I did want to mention briefly that I want to Hades Town as well, and I could give
Oh
a
yeah.
nutshell version of it. Uh, Nutshell version. So I think that the conceit of Hades Town, like the major change that I would say, is in contrasting the story of Orpheus and Eurydice with the story of Hades and Persephone. This
Mm.
is brilliant and kind of gives power to the entire thing, right? I've
Yes.
never really thought of it in those terms. I do think that some of the communist subtext, I it's well done in terms of like it's very artful, uh, but I don't really think it
Excuse me.
helps it. The power of the narrative comes from that contrast of the two love stories, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
it's such a smart idea, right? Persephone goes down into the underworld to be, to be with Hades, but leaves every few months to go to the surface. Orpheus goes down to the underworld to find Eurydice and tries to leave with her, right? That contrast is incredibly clever, and in my opinion, that's like the main innovation of Hades Town, right? Uh, yeah, I would recommend it. Personally speaking, I think that Hades Town is probably a little bit better than Epic the Musical. Um, it's a very different style though, so it's hard to say. Like very different, Hades Town's like folk music, and Epic is sort of like is a very very modern rock. This is what I would call it, right? Like
Yeah.
very Lin Manuel Miranda esque too in some of its styles, which I think are the worst parts of Epic. Uh, actually. But yeah, Hades Town, we did have a stream on it once. I recommend it too. Once again, I liked it more than Ben, but it's good. Yeah.
It's normal.
Yeah.
I'm sort of interested in that nerds must die thing. I'm
Nerdy
kind of
prudes must die.
yes. I like this idea, Anthony, of nerds dying. They must be
Star
purged.
Kid does have some excellent stuff. I've seen. So Twisted is a certified classic. Just an
A hood
absolute
classic, even.
banger. What was that?
A certified hood classic, even.
A certified hood classic, even. Yeah, just an absolute banger. Uh, I don't know. I still quote lines from it when they do. I love Aladdin's song, where he orphaned at 33, which already has a great title. Uh, and then at the end of the song, he's like, "I'll break the." It's like gets increasingly unhinged as it goes, and then it ends with him going, "I'll break the chain. You'll see. I'm gonna live forever," which is just 10 of 10. Uh, the whole thing, like, there's so many moments like that. Uh, yeah, Twisted is a classic. The Harry Potter musicals, which is how they got their start, I would say they're not really worth watching unless you grew up with Harry Potter. But if you did grow up with Harry Potter, they're absolute must-watches because they are like pitch perfect parody. Uh, they nail all of the political elements. I love the joke, and some of the jokes are really dumb but really funny. Like I like the joke where they have a whole song about Cho Chang that they do in like a faux Chinese style, and one of them goes up and goes "Konnichiwa, Cho Chang," which first off is already funny because Konnichiwa's Japanese. And then she goes, and then they go, "That's Lavender Brown," and then they slap her and call her racist. And then Cho Chang comes out, and she's like a tall redhead with a southern accent. Uh, there is no like, does that have anything to do with Harry Potter? No. Did I laugh at that joke the first time I saw it? Yes. Uh, it's a very dumb joke.
All right.
Yeah. So Star Kid, they're good,
Yes.
and they had other stuff too. The Oregon Trail musical is pretty funny. Uh, like they literally do it like the game. They have the audience pick the names of the main characters. Uh,
Paris would have been a theater kid, Anthony.
what was that?
Paris would have been a theater kid, Anthony.
You would have loved it.
He would have.
Paris would have been the lead in every show.
He would have. And you could see like Hector being like, "Come on, you gotta support your brother, King Priam, please, father." No, 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 no. Paris is the star of the show. He's the star of every show. And he's like just sitting in the back, just like, I could be
For the
raiding.
people
I could be
listening, you
breaking
have to
horses.
understand that as when I read the Iliad, I started reading Paris's lines in the gay accent, and it works incredibly well.
Beautiful. I accept it. Yes, I see
Yeah.
it. All right.
They have this amazing scene in the Lombardo translation, especially. Just like the translation is beautiful, where he wounds Diomedes with an arrow, and the wound is actually like he wounds him in the foot. I think the wound is actually pretty bad, and Paris says like, and I'm gonna do it in the gay voices. I was like, I hit him, I wounded the great Diomedes. And Diomedes' response is like, "You sissy-haired pimp of an archer." And then he's like, "You think that this scratch?" And like he's actually like Homer makes a point of going like he's actually pretty badly wounded, like it's very painful.
Yes.
But he's like, "You think the scratch is enough to wound me?" He goes, "You want to know what happens when I hit people with my weapon? They fucking die." He's like, their wives mourn, their children are fatherless. He's like, "Why don't you come here and fight me man to man?" Just an incredible moment.
So angry.
It's so good.
It's great.
All right, I'm done.
All right. Thank you guys for listening. We are arranging for guests for the next few weeks. Hopefully,
Yep.
they will show up. All right. Have a good night, everyone.